Hi. I would say it's not easy to wear a cool t-shirt overall. That's not easy to pull that off because cool t-shirts kind of blow because for reasons that you already know, mostly. If you're out there and you're wondering why is it suck to wear a cool t-shirt, well, I guess you'd be like, no, it's great. Just the kind of people that are like, I love when it's sunny outside. I actually like when it's sunny myself. I'm a fan. I like when it's sunny. I like the beach. I do. People who say they don't like the beach, I mean, they're just being difficult. Or they're just not, I mean, they probably don't like it. They're just in a frame of mind where they're purposefully deciding to not like the beach. And there's nothing you can do for a person like that. Um, it kind of sucks that the New World Order might happen if that does happen. Uh, that's tough. I guess I'll just keep broadcasting until the New World Order occurs. There's only so much that you can do to prevent the New World Order, but like I really hope it doesn't. I really hope the New World Order doesn't happen, but there are like forces and people beyond the veil of elected officials that are trying to enact things, and you know that they have a lot of purpose and intent when they have this giant coordinated effort to roll out a vaccine. But it's just kind of like the establishment is very excited about the virus since the day it was incepted on the world. Since the day it happened in the world, the establishment has been very excited about the virus and also very excited about the vaccine. Like regular people have never been nearly as into the virus as the media and the establishment and ultimately the deep state. Like they are so much more interested and excited about it, and like that they're putting forth these large coordinated worldwide efforts in the name of these things shows you that they're motivated to do it. And I don't know where you'd say, because I feel like the knock on government often is that they'd be so bureaucratic they wouldn't be able to accomplish something like a world takeover. But there are groups of people maybe that are more motivated than the government. Maybe they practice something like Satanism. Like maybe you can only have that motivation when you're part of a religious movement or something. But like what I was saying in the last episode is if it is Satanist, it's something that you could refer to as Satanism, even if it wasn't Satanism specifically. Like they might not, like the people who want the New World Order might not all be practicing Satanism, but they probably do want to bring about something like the end of Christianity, because they probably want with the New World Order, they want a new age that is not defined to Jesus anymore, like basically, but probably just a new age that isn't defined to like books. They want a new age defined on new terms as a new world. And I feel like this would be against like a new age. We would do things probably entirely differently, or what these people are hoping for. Like in a new age, there wouldn't be work, and not having work is anti-Bible and anti the messages from the very beginning of the Bible. Just like I was saying last time about how the stage is set in the Adam and Eve story. Like they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the Greek translation of the word knowledge there, I don't know if have said this before, but it is really similar to the word processing, but they chose the word knowledge. But it's like the Greek word is a word for processing. It's the processing of good and evil, which further would support that it's a separation of good and evil is what it's talking about. But it is the separation of good and evil because it introduces a story world that is dependent on like heroes and villains, and we live in a more of a heroes versus villain society where it's like good is very separate from evil. And then when we look at words, we process them, and we often as a whole society or as individuals see a word as entirely good or entirely evil because we live in a world that separates both of them. And like Satanist mentality, from what I understand, is a equating of good and evil. But it's like Satanism would look at good and evil as the same, because they're just like, well, if you destroy something, that's just creating something else, and it's whatever. It's like saying that when people are evil, then motivates some good somewhere else, but it's like not seeing a separation is more, it's anti-Bible and supports a more primitive message. And besides that, like primitively speaking, when a lion kills somebody, the like animals don't know good and evil. When a lion eats somebody, it's not considering that it's good or bad to do that. It's just like a primitive thing to ignore the difference. But it's like it's a consciousness and awareness that is introduced in according to Adam and Eve at the point that we ate of a tree. And I would say that it's more symbolic of something that happened where we became aware to the point that we acknowledge like a difference between good and evil, or like an awareness that also brings about that you have to wear clothes because of you understand evilness, or just like it's kind of like a separation from nature, really. It's like that's kind of maybe what Adam and Eve is describing. The point at which we became separate from nature is part of it, and that separation causes you to separate yourself, like censorship and stuff like that. And so there's the Adam and the Eve, and then there's Eve, there's Adam, there's also Eve, but let me say more. There's like, so it's processing of good and evil. It's like a separation, but they want a new world, and it's like in Adam and Eve, when they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it's like now it's saying that men have to work. And Jordan Peterson talks about Adam and Eve a lot. Also, he brings up the point that at the point that we have to work, it's this acknowledgement of the way that time works, where we're able to see into the future to see that we are going to need to store up for the future. It's kind of like a deeper understanding of time or something, like where you, and I think in some respects, eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is like they, it introduces, because it says that, well, now you're going to die. It introduces a knowledge of that you're going to die, like, and that you space things out in time frames like this. I think that when it says that they are now going to die, it's more like that the divide between their death and whatever comes after that is now something you can't see past, because like now you have to acknowledge things in time frames and definitions and knowledge, acknowledgeable instances. Like you would be conscious of that you're going to die, and that beyond that you don't really know what's going to happen. But like there's just kind of an way of seeing things in terms of time frames that's introduced, where you, including the one of your lifetime, but also one where you're like day to day, you know that you're going to have to get food for the future. You're going to have to, but it like introduces a work relationship where you know that you have to work because the future is coming where you will need food. But I would say that like before there was awareness, if people were just operating off of animal instincts, that awareness of that you need to prepare for the future wasn't there, where because it would have been purely instinctual before that, when we were just animals. And in that respect, we would have, like, the trust in yourself to survive or whatever would have been assumed, and you wouldn't have been like preparing or whatever, the same way that an animal acts. But where it's just instinctual, the how they end up getting their food. But then like with the separation of good and evil, for whatever reason, when they ate of it, that it says in the Bible that they needed to work for their food. But this is I think that the Satanists, or people that want to bring about the end of the Jesus age, and I think that that is in some respects what is referred to in the New World Order. Is like they want a new age defined on new terms, and I think some of them are actually anti the Bible from the very beginning, from where it's talking about it in Adam and Eve, like anti-work, where we now don't, like, potentially in the future things don't work, where people have to work, and generally jobs are going to be replaced a lot by robots. But and the New World Order enthusiasts are trying to bring about an age where people don't have to contribute anything, and they just want everybody to sit at home. And you see that that's true, and they want everybody to just be at home all the time. They want regular people to be a non-factor. They want everybody to just shut up and go to sleep and put masks over their faces. And like, and basically they would love a world where everybody was just sitting at home and doing nothing because they're like, they want a new age that doesn't operate on this work system where people are like making money, because in a lot of respects the work system is kind of artificial, that there it's constructed that we're like, oh, for a lot of people they're not actually doing anything, and there's a lot of inefficiency and bureaucracy in both private and public sector, that it's just kind of like there's a lot of lower level people that don't accomplish a lot, and besides that they're just like sending emails around and shit like that, and so like there's inefficiencies in construction in the work relationship, but a return to a more primitive state is against construction and in the direction and mindset of destruction. And the way that nature is destructive. Like trees grow over all the constructed things and destroy them. Constructed things are man-made. But like, I mean, they probably want a new age that's just defined by man creating all of it, rather than that it's just they want a new age. I think this people that are beyond the veil of elected officials, that um, is about man, is about what man creates. I forget what I was just gonna say. It's about what, but it would just be defined to people doing all of it. And it's kind of like we live in a world currently that, as long as it's defined by Jesus, I'd say is defined by books pretty profoundly. Like it's defined by books, and books are always these contained instances. I'd say that books in general are just derivatives of the Bible, and that we live in a Bible age, and that books are kind of, I think that the Bible is the presentation, and then other books are representations. But when you have a book is like a book is like a secret society a little bit. Like the Satanic Bible is a derivative of the Bible, I would say. It's a version of it. But like because of, and just because of the prominence of books and the what people read into them. But books are kind of like magical artifacts in this way, like all of them, where they can create a secret society. But it's like when somebody's writing a book, in some respects, you think of it from in terms of the author. The author is trying to craft and order a bunch of words onto a page in the exact right way so as to have the greatest amount of influence or have the greatest impact. And it's basically like a manipulated, constructed series of events. The words, the pages that they put together, the words and chapters that they put together, it's like it's ordered in a certain way according to the author, according to the creator of it, and that they order these words. It's kind of like drawing from magical sources to some extent, that it's just like it's a written work, it's something they made, and that they order it, and that like I would say that words are represented, they're tokens or they're placeholders for feelings, and the more specific a vocabulary is, the more fine-tuned you're able to pinpoint a feeling and then be able to discuss that. Like words are representative of feelings when you actually define one of them, and so then we like create new words, and then we have a more intelligent ability to express feelings or whatever, the more words that we make. But it's kind of like an ordering of a bunch of feelings in the exact right way onto when you create a book. And then sometimes it can become really famous, and that shows that that person was good at writing the book so as that people really caught on with it. Like it has a lot of influence, but because the words are always written that same way on the page, like forever, it's kind of like I mean, it's a traditionalist thing to be really to read books and then promote them. Like books are more traditionalist because they are a tradition at the point one of them is made. They're traditional because it's always the same, but in different ages, as long as the book is surviving. And so it's like it becomes a tradition if it continues to last. If it doesn't last at all, then it's like you wouldn't call that a tradition. But like the books that are noteworthy to become traditions because it's a tradition when it keeps being repeated as the exact same thing through the ages. And so it's like 1984 is like a secret society, but books that Nietzsche wrote are like, any books are like secret societies because they're this closed interval, and then a lot of people buy into the power of it, and then they like to talk amongst themselves secretly when it's like you find somebody who's read the same book as you. People, I'd say that it carries out a little bit more secretively than when it's somebody who watched a movie that you like, but I guess movies generally are more visible and books are more, I'd say books are more secretive because of what you have to do to read it. Like to obtain the knowledge of a book is more of an initiation a little bit, because you have to go, because it's there for you to do. You just have to read it. But at the point that you read it, you get to be part of the club of people that read it, and it's more secretive because I mean books are a bit more, they're hidden. You have to open a book and then wow, there it is. Then all that shit is there all of a sudden. But like you could go to any one book. I'm just arguing that a book would be more secretive than a movie, and it's more just because of that you read it as opposed to that you watch it. It's not visual. It's you take it in through imperceptibly. Basically, you take it in imperceptibly when you read a book, and books kind of create secret societies like that, where it's like, and then if it's big enough, like 1984, everyone's like, then peripherally all the 1984 phrases and shit like that get back to you more so when the society is bigger and promoting and sharing and spreading and circulating the words and terms of the book. Then I mean, then the society becomes big enough that it's just like influencing society at large, and that can happen with any work of art. That can happen with any invention. That can happen with Windex. Somebody made Windex, and they're like, when somebody makes Windex, it's a chemical concoction of sorts. They're like, oh, you know what? If you mix this chemical with this chemical, but it's like these two chemicals existed, and then somebody comes up with a way to mix the chemicals, and then a new invention, a new creation. It's Windex. This is like it's a new. I'm just talking about components that combine to make a product, and the components that came together, like in this case, different elements, like some compound that involved lots of carbon and hydrogen. All of that, all compounds basically are a lot of carbon and hydrogen, the ones that we know about. But it's like somebody mixed chemicals together, they made this new invention, they make Windex, and then Windex catches on as this new creation, this invention of and it's kind of like a symposium. Let me look up what the word symposium means, as long as I'm just riffing. It's like a symposium. I want to see if that's an accurate use. So symposium, it's a concoction of elements. It's a concoction of elements that it is Windex, and then a community develops around it, and they start circulating Windex. But they're like, no, you got to use this Windex because they find it to be a good product. But somebody made it. It's like, and they drew from existing materials and combined those. I mean, not so much materials, but like chemical compounds. They combined them to make a new thing that hadn't previously existed. But it's like when somebody made LSD, that was the same thing that happened. That because LSD is man-made, it doesn't come from the ground, and so just like a mixture of chemicals to create a new chemical, and then then it catches on, and like these things that you use slightly you can become dependent on it. You wouldn't become dependent on Windex probably because you wouldn't have a relationship to it where you're like drinking it or anything. But you can really rely on Windex if you're like, oh, that works in all circumstances. If Windex has a lot of utility, but people use drugs. People make it so that a drug has a lot of utility when they become addicted to it, because they're like, well, I'll do anything on this drug because it makes everything better. It's like if you smoke weed, then everything is enhanced. Then it's kind of like weed has a lot of utility in this respect. I would say that it does, just because there are many different groups of people that like it. Like I'd say that that's an unidentifiable quality. I don't know if that's the same. I might have accidentally referred to that as identifiable in the past. I'd say maybe it's like the more identity groups of people you apply to, the more unidentifiable you are. It's like it's an anti-identity, I would say, because an identity should be a singular instance, but the intersection of many identities is what I'm referring to. So to the point that you become more unidentifiable. So it's like weed would apply to lots of different groups of people. It has utility in this way because many different people use it, and for for many different things. But like if you become addicted to something, then you're like, every day of my life has to play out through this filter, and you basically, some people become the drug where they just give. But this is like, this is how a relationship works, where if, especially if you consider a drug to be a different entity, that it's like it speaks to you a different message at the point that you're under the influence of it. I think that when you go under the influence of a drug, that it's kind of like a different person, and what it does is it makes you a slightly different person. And then if you take LSD and you go on a bad trip, which is like, everyone's like, you might just be on a bad trip, so don't take LSD. Like a bad trip is basically just not embracing that you are now a slightly different person, because that would be a big deal. That would be hard for people to embrace, but not embracing that you're under the influence of this new entity, so to speak, is what would cause you to like have a bad trip the whole time, because it's just like a denial of reality. But you would have to just accept that things are different, because you take LSD and that thing, that entity might say things to you that are like they would be way too difficult for you to hear. Like now that you're in this reality that's under the influence, you're under the influence of this new reality, and it might be basically impossible for you to accept based on the life that you've lived to that point. Like whatever that new reality presents to you might be too difficult, and that's what would cause you to go on a bad trip. It's like, it's easy for that to happen. And like it makes you a slightly different person, but it's kind of like things call out to you. Like you take LSD and then it has a certain set of messages basically, and they're pretty pro LSD, and it's to the point, some of these drugs are so so polarizing, and you would have to be wary of them, because some of them like try to take you over, and like the ones that people are more addicted to, or like people get taken over by a drug, and it might just be because something like LSD has such a strong presence that you can't resist it, or even at a lesser level that you can't resist talking about it, or like you might take it and then that defines you, like even just a couple experiences of it, because it has such a strong presence, or whatever the thing is. And so that's why you would want to be wary about taking whatever drug. It's because some of them might present a message that's so strong to you that you just want to become that. But it's like that you would stigmatize that is a little bit silly, because that's the way that everything works. Because it's the same with people, like you can kind of be you can be subjected to a person, and subject yourself to a person in the same way. Somebody who has a really strong presence, you feel, and you would be like, everything, you can make people gods, where you're like, whatever they said will be true because it's already better than me. You could like subject yourself to people the same way, where you're like, where you end up always thinking about them or defining yourself in terms of that relationship or whatever. But it's like, there are so many ways that you can give yourself over to something else, when the relationship of it becomes that you are orbiting so much more around them than they're orbiting around you. Because the relationship is two-way, so it's kind of like, in a two-way relationship, you have a certain percentage of the power, and then the other person has a certain percentage. And that's how a relationship works, because it's relative like that. So relative, it would be a two-way, different relative rates, but it's like, where it could be like 20%, 80% how much power you versus the thing. And obviously there's like, you can consider relationships in terms of more than two, and then it's like, there's different percentages, but it's like relatively speaking, as opposed to, because if you're not in a relationship, there isn't relativity going on between you and another entity or person that you're mutually exclusive from. If that's the case, you're mutually exclusive, then it's like they are absolute to you and you are absolute to them, or like, because you haven't intersected in any way to know each other. But at the point that there's a relationship, then, so like in life, you can't escape from that. You're in a relationship to just like a video game that you play, or whatever, a video game or a book that you read, or just inventions, like things that you give yourself over to. It's just the case that like you would want to moderate everything, so that you're not giving yourself because at the point that you give yourself to like way too much over to something else, then that is when you're defined by it. But like that doesn't have to kill you because you can come in and out of things, but it's just like it's just susceptibility to, you are susceptible to certain things and certain ideologies or mentalities, like fascism. You could really love fascism, and then fascism calls out to you. But like the messages that you would receive under the influence of LSD are just like certain messages specific to LSD that promote very strongly an LSD centered reality. And LSD is like, to the point that LSD is going to be telling you like to tell other people to take LSD too. It's like a virus like that, where some of these drugs are like viruses. It's the same with weed, where you take it and then you want to become more identified to it, and going along with that you want to tell other people about it, or like make it so that they're under the influence too. But it's like, you come under the influence of fascism, you might like it so much that you start spreading it around. You're like, because it takes over you enough to the point that you're like sharing it. You become a spreader of the thing that used to just be something you were outside of. I mean, if it's something that you end up being passionate about. But I think to some extent, who you are as a person is determined by these things, by your wants, it's like who you are as a person in some respects is determined by all of the things outside of you, because this is how you tell what a person's position is exemplary of or composed of, is all of the things that they end up doing, and then to what degree they end up doing it, like what percentage of themselves they give away to the different things. This is in some respects entirely how you define a person. It's like, and maybe that's just like visibly, or as far as somebody making a judgment on you, like visibly you're defined as a person by all of the things you align yourself with the most. And that's like visually, because people can see when you have a poster of a rock band that you like, that you've devoted a lot of time or money to, or, and like people can see those things that you frequently do. And so I guess to me, I feel like that is what defines you to some extent. But rather than that what defines you is something that plays out internally, or I don't know. I mean, like internally might just kind of be connected with external, that you like, maybe you don't really need to separate either of them, and it's just that whatever you do that people can see on the outside is always a reflection of what you are internally. It's just a frequency. A person is a frequency, and they're the set of all frequencies, the set of all where they frequent relationships. Like they frequently use Windex way more so than Lysol or something, so you tell that they have a stronger relationship to Windex. They're slightly more defined to this. If Windex is in their home but Lysol isn't, then they're like, you can see this with the objects in somebody's home, though the directions and entities, whatever, that they're aligning themselves with. And like they're and the set of all of those, like all of the frequented relationships, is kind of what the person is. But you get to view frequency at the level that you want to, so that you're like, you can zero in on that a person exhibits a characteristic, like that they're very loving or something, and you're like, oh, they're loving in pretty much every instance that I've seen them. This is frequently seen in them. Like you can zero in on that. You can zero in on what level of frequency that you want. You get to choose the category. It's just that some people might be more in the business of viewing it more broadly. So you're like, they take a whole body of work. So somebody might view frequency at the broadest possible level, or just the entire lifespan, rather than zeroing in on a category or a time frame that is smaller, like a single judgment or single instance that you saw them. Like if you're just like, you saw somebody using Windex, and like Windex, not a great example. Like if you saw somebody using like a brand versus another brand, like if you saw somebody drinking Miller Lite, and saw somebody drinking Miller Lite, you might be like, oh, they're a Miller Lite drinker, if you don't view it at a very broad scope. But if you're somebody who analyzes it like in larger frequencies, larger time frames, you might view all of their actions and see that they drink a variety of beers in varying frequencies. And then you might come to a more profound conclusion if you view it at a broader scope. You might be like, oh, they are generally a Miller Lite drinker or something, or they're like, oh, they're actually more of a Bud Light drinker. But you're like, you get to choose the level at which you're viewing the frequency, like you get to choose the category. It's just that the category is defined to a name. And so if you're just viewing the Miller light, uh, like if you're just viewing the amount that Miller light appears in the world, you're viewing the frequency of Miller light as defined to that name, but then you can choose the category of beers, and then this will give you like a more general, like, oh, Miller light actually frequents the beer category only this many times, and Bud Light frequents it this many times. You're like, but beers is this broader category that is defined to the name beer. But this is what frequency is. And what I'm saying is you can't actually define frequency. Like, frequency is completely amorphous and undefinable otherwise. It's just that in order to play out life in any sort of constructed of or relatable event at all, you have to arbitrarily denote a category somewhere. It can be at beers, but it's like beers is an arbitrary category. And I'm saying that frequency is already infinite. It's like there is no point at which it stops. Like you could stop at Miller Lite, and this is like a point, but it's just at the point that you do recognize a point. It's this is what time is. This is what we're talking about with time, is you being able to acknowledge it just in either small units or wider units, seconds or minutes or hours or whole lifetimes. So that lifetime is a time frame. Like that's what time is. That you acknowledge a point at all is you're like, oh, there is time. There is seconds. Like seconds are, they chop up the space that would have been there, but seconds are automated as opposed to Miller Lite is there's different spaces between you being able to recognize it at different times or whatever. But like I was looking up the word symposium. I just need to chill out. I need to relax. Like I need to not. I think like I should probably just broadcast more, and I'm a little worried about the New World Order's impending, its imminence. I'm a little worried. So I just kind of want to do more broadcasts, and so I just need to get off that things have to be a theme. I should be more prolific, honestly. I think that that's correct to do. It's just that I should probably, well, in some respects, be more serious than I'm just like novelty episode about Satan. That's fun. Like I don't need to always do novelty episode. But novelty about Satan. Okay, so symposium definition. I think that good and evil works. I think that people are good or they're evil. I think it's a characteristic that can be found in people. But I was trying to say this at the beginning of this episode that like we treat a word as completely good or completely evil. Like the word embarrassment is we always associate it negatively, but this is a result of that we live in this world that separates good and evil completely. But at some point the word, sometimes in your lifetime, a word will reach its pinnacle. And I think that the peak of a word, maybe the peak of a word's popularity, like where it is both negative and positive, this is where good meets evil. And it's like, this is where good and evil are the same. It's like the peak of the word's usage and I think that the peak of its usage is also the point that it is transitioning either out of good and into evil or out of evil and into good. And like the word embarrassment is, we typically associate it negatively, but maybe this is one that we're processing to try to say that it's positive. And it's kind of like, if you would never be able to see it in yourself to embarrass other people, this is how I think embarrassment works. Practically, if you don't see it that you could ever embarrass anybody else, then you will always be embarrassed. Like, not everybody seeks to deal out life in terms of the context or the filter of embarrassment. Like, not everybody cares about it, but they're like, if it's always the case that you are only ever embarrassed, if you're only ever embarrassed, I think that's a result of you don't see it as that you could embarrass anybody else, embarrass anybody on your own. But it's like, the point I'm making is that you'll always be embarrassed if you never allow yourself to embarrass somebody else. But like embarrassing somebody else isn't necessarily negative. It's just like more aggressive as opposed to passive. Embarrassing is like barring, like according to the original wording of it, it's like a to embarrass is to bar somebody or to perplex somebody or confound them. To bar somebody, to prevent them, you preventing them is barring them. That's you embarrass somebody. And so in that respect, like you barring somebody else is necessary in a lot of respects, like as a self-defense measure. It's like you should see that you embarrass other people, but like embarrassment is one of those that it's like negative. um I think we view it generally as negative, but like the 1960s is a that's a decade where good met evil, maybe for like that's a decade of a peak of some sort, just in terms of the course of time, maybe for the entity that is America, as opposed to like a word like embarrassment. Like America is like the point at which good met evil for America is maybe the 1960s, and so there's like a lot of just a lot of shit going on then. Like that's a sort of peak, and it might be like a peak for the development of the country also. Like maybe at that point is when we transitioned out of good and into evil, and then because that's the point at which we started to see America as evil. And so because that is where good met evil, that's why it's like so profound and like lots of change and very memorable. Is Yeah, very memorable, very circulated, very visible, like remembered is the 60s. And like yeah, I think that's like where good met evil for America. Symposium is a conference or meeting to discuss a particular subject. Okay, so it's a coming together. That's what I was saying, but it's not exactly correct. I think I stretch a word sometimes. A collection of essays, or yeah, it's a symposium. It's a collection. It's like a compound. A symposium is like a compound. Um, a symposium. I will use symposium for that if I want. I mean, but you see that that was just the word out of my mouth for it. But like so I think that people are good or they're evil, and this is a characteristic. And there's a lot of words that we don't. Another thing we do with words is that we sometimes platform promote a word so much, and then we forget that this characteristic can be found in people, and it's like to the detriment of the people that have it. Like influence, for example. Now we live in an age where there are influencers, and it's understood that an influencer has millions of followers. When it's like there are lots of people I've met are very influential but don't have millions of followers on Instagram. And so it's like we sometimes, and then over time, if that's the case for a long time, like an influencer is always if it's the case for like 100 years, an influencer is always somebody with millions of followers. Then this you completely forget about that people, just regular people, can be influential. So um it's like the higher ups, the elites that are like globalists behind the New World Order are they do that with power. Like you forget that power would be held by a person, but it's just that the people with the most amount of power are very motivated in the context of a virus, and to dole out their agenda under the guise of the virus. I mean, just through the virus, like this medium is how they distribute their message. But like what you would want to worry about is just how into it the establishment is. The establishment is very into the virus and then the vaccine, because these are the people with the most power. But it's like they will always think that they are like a better race of people, and they can think that without a second glance, because they can think that they are way more intelligent because of the power, because of the authoritarian state, because of the power that we give to authority. And authority is like it's just that we always have to structure things in terms of authority. It gives the people who have the most power continual power, and I mean, they're just gonna they don't care about commoners. They think that they're like an advanced race. Like it's the same as Nazism. They think that they're an elite race of people, or the people at the highest levels, and so they just think that they deserve to enact the decisions. But it's like, probably, I wouldn't say that you would want to define the deep state to any one level, like beyond the veil of elected officials. You wouldn't say like they're all Freemasons or all Satanists or they're all globalist. Like globalist is a term like aliens for whatever is beyond the visible screen of elected officials, the visual rulers. Like the deep state or globalist is kind of like a term like aliens, where we use a term like aliens to apply to a space that is an unknown, or a space that is an unidentity. We use aliens for that for the entire rest of the universe. Globalist is a term like aliens, but for the unidentity that is all the people in the deep state, all the people beyond what we can see. And there are secret societies beyond that. It's just that there are probably a lot of levels to it. Some people believe that at the heart of it, there is a world czar. There's one guy that's so far down, like beyond the Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab level. There's one guy that's so far down that, or like so far up, that is ruling all of it. And I think that that's possible, but it's like people conceptualize it in terms of a pyramid, where at the very top of the pyramid, or like same with the all-seeing eye. The all-seeing eye is kind of like representative of the person that is something like the most unidentifiable, because he is able to dictate authority for all authorities and all identities on the earth. Like the all-seeing eye person is like sort of like the world czar. That there is a person like this. But I would say that if this is true, like if there's levels, there's deeper and deeper levels. I think there's deeper levels of it, and it's just that it's dependent on the time period, it's dependent on the age, it's dependent on the perception that we have of who is ruling us, is what is going to say how far we've gone. It's just that we arrive at different perceptions over time. So it's like now we've arrived at the perception on a more mainstream level that it's like the people ruling the world are actually Bill Gates and these globalists and the United Nations. And it's like the United States government really doesn't play as much of a role as we thought. It's so we arrive at this new perception, but that's just indicative of, that's just this time period that we live in. We graduated to that perception, and time is just waiting for us to graduate to an even further perception. But it's like the level that Bill Gates has carved out is a certain authority that is defined to him. It's a certain time frame, and it's a perception that he creates. Bill Gates creates this perception where Bill Gates creates this perception that is defined to him, but he creates that by being an authority that we believe in. He is able to do that because of authorities that he's aligned himself with during the course of his life. So it's like Joe Rogan has aligned himself with a number of authorities during the course of his life, and this ultimately is why his podcast results to be the biggest. His podcast is the biggest because we live in an authoritarian state, because he has aligned himself with the correct authorities. Some of them are drugs that he's taken because he retains the secrecy of DMT, and DMT is like the world czar of visibly used drugs. It's the most important, like that's the highest up one though, that's the craziest one to take. But Joe Rogan has taken it, he has that secret knowledge, and so we look to him for authority, for that and for all these other drugs. And so he's like, he has these authorities across many different drugs, so that helps him out. But also he's aligned himself with MMA, and MMA is like a continually is very persistent, strong authority that people like believe that it's good to do that. And it's like it's an art form. It's a mixed martial arts. And so he's aligned himself with this art form too, that also has secrecy, that he has the knowledge and the know-how of MMA that other people don't. So we look to him for authority in that respect. Also stand-up comedy. So like this is another like, oh, what's it like to be in the club of that, like perform the initiation of doing stand-up and also be one of the most known names in it. Like, so it helps that he's he's high up enough stand-up comedian, obviously. I mean, that's generally how it started. He gets an audience through comedy, and then his podcast becomes really big because he already had an audience from touring and doing a lot of stand-up. But it's like he aligned himself with stand-up over time. And so Joe Rogan in some respects engages in magic, like that he magically harnesses the power. But like he invokes a lot of territories. He invokes a lot of authorities. And so Joe Rogan reaches this certain level of authority, and it's cumulative of all the authorities that he has. It's what dictates that he is somebody that you look to. And this is just ultimately the reason why he has a lot of influence, is because he has collected many authorities. But he's aligned himself. But so like Joe Rogan is really big in podcasting, but yet we wouldn't say that he has more authority than Bill Gates, because for whatever reason, but it's basically because the kinds of authorities that Joe Rogan has aligned himself with are more for fun. They're more in the entertainment world. Like they're more for fun, and so he retains this certain level of authority because of all the authorities he's aligned himself with. But Bill Gates is somebody who took it to this much further level where he's like, oh, we're just trying to collect authorities, and then whoever has the most gives us the most power. Like, because Bill Gates has more authority than Joe Rogan, ultimately, like in the respect of that we listen to Bill Gates, whether you like it or not. We listen to him the most is the reason he has this amount of power, but it's because it's an authoritarian state. But like Bill Gates took it to this level that was way too serious. He's like, oh, we're just trying to collect authorities. So he aligned himself with like technology, and technology is ever present, persistent authority that people believe in. And then he uses his billions of dollars to invest in medicine. Medicine is an authority that is very long lasting. Uses his billions of dollars to invest in news agencies, media. Media is very long lasting. Like, so he invests in narrative authority, medical authority, technological authority, and then he as a person embodies these three huge genres. They're like these are like the basic areas of authority. Like he as a formula, he as a recipe, as a person, as an accumulation of these authorities, he's aligned himself with the main ones, and to very strong degrees is why he is the one who has the most authority. But it's kind of like he is, during the course of his life, whether he's doing it intentionally or not, he aligns himself with the most authorities because we live in an authoritarian state. So he knows that the person with the most authority is going to be the person with the most power. And so like he goes really deep into authority. He's really does it. And what results is that he's the person that is over the most people. But that dividing line, that like where he's subjecting everybody to the world that the world we're living in is influenced the most by Bill Gates, is like we're under the subjection, or we are underneath the dividing line that is Bill Gates. Like the dividing line is kind of it is Bill Gates, and then at that point, like beyond it, I'm saying there might be further world leaders that are telling Bill Gates what to do, and there probably is, and that's just like it's based on perception across at a mainstream level, but there's still individuals and smaller groups of people that go beyond mainstream perceptions to try to point out more nuanced perceptions that are beyond the scope of what's going on a mainstream level. So there's people on the earth that know about whoever the leader is beyond Bill Gates, but like that hasn't reached most of us. It hasn't even reached most conspiracy theorists, like whatever that is. But it's like the authority that he creates, where everybody is underneath Bill Gates, is a time that is created, and is a bandwidth of frequency, or a perception, or an authority that is created, that is defined to Bill Gates. It's just that different relative time frames are all existing on the earth at the same time, and perception is like an idea that explains that you being able to match. But what's the point that I'm making? The point that I'm making is like that people carve out time frames. Like this is something that's unnatural and something that's evil about what Bill Gates does, because it is constructed at the point that he is creating, like arbitrarily. We don't have to recognize the authority of Bill Gates, but we do. But that we do kind of defines the age that we live in. That's defined by that perception. So we're just defined by a lot of perceptions, and a lot of them coexist at the same time. And people, in aligning themselves with authorities, are trying to move up the power structure. But that's kind of what's evil about it, is that you're defining a whole age to yourself, but making it so that time is acknowledgeable, or like it's acknowledgeable to that this is a time frame are under the authority of Bill Gates. But it's like the time frame and the recognition of time is dependent on these authorities. And it's kind of like the separation of good and evil has to do with recognition of time frames. But equating of good and evil, that they're the same, is more that lack of recognition of time. Or you would see it as that, like, at the point that you died and whatever you transform into after that, or you go to heaven or hell or whatever, that the dividing line between that doesn't, if you saw that the dividing line between your death and whatever's beyond it to not matter, this would be a world that doesn't recognize time. And so maybe it's like recognition of time in some respects is a recognition of good and evil. But like I really went into it today. Really went into it. What am I going to call this episode? I hope it's still recording when I looked up symposium. Oh, so 50 minutes. I think that people are good and people are evil, and that's found in you or I. And I think maybe it works like this. I think that good and evil, and what I'm saying is that, like, it's kind of like saying that people stay the same or they change. There are some people that like to change. These people don't really like permanence. They're more temporary. Some people like to change, some people like to stay the same. But these are kind of trajectories that people can take through life, where it's like who you are the first half of your life. If you are different for the latter half of your life, or if you see somebody that's embodying a trajectory where they change, then over the course of their life on a large level, where it's like the whole first half of their life they were like this, and then they went on this trajectory where they changed into something else. Somebody who changes is evil. Somebody who stays the same is good. And it's like, I think that if you identify people who are evil when they're younger, if you identify people who are evil when they're kids, like if you're a kid and you have a reputation that you are evil, and you actually are, like the authorities above you correctly identify that you're evil, then that is a way of stamping out evil. Where it's like, then if you correctly identify that they're evil, they'll change and become good. But if you are evil and then people think that you're good, you might change and become evil. Because I'm just saying that evil people will always change, but it's like a trajectory through life. And on the same hand, if you're a good person and then people are like, oh, you're a good person, then you'll be a good person your whole life. If you're good and then it's your reputation for the first half of your life that you're bad, then that's just a tragedy, because now you're going to be bad your whole life because that's what you think. It's just maybe like some people do the opposite of what gets back to them, is also what I'm saying. Some people hear what gets back to them and then they're just like, they wouldn't take any command or something. So they're just always going to do the opposite. They're always going to change. People that always do the opposite are evil. And I think I think you're good or you're evil like that. But that you're good or that you're bad, or that you're good, or that there's bad and there's good. I used to think that it meant something to be bad. Like, as long as I'm like, I have to be a good person, and that's what's most important, is being a good person. If you think you always have to be a good person, you might actually build up being bad to be a bigger deal than it actually is. Like, maybe recently I understood what it means to be bad, but also it doesn't mean anything really. It's actually not a big deal to be bad. It's not that bad. It's not that bad to be bad. It's kind of more like as bad as Michael Jackson singing about it. I'm bad, I'm bad. Like, it's not very bad. That, like, what he's saying, it's just kind of sassy or catty. It's not really a big deal. It's actually not much of an achievement to be bad. It's about as bad as the Michael Jackson singing it, like, as much like anger and angst that you communicate through a pop song is like, it's just kind of, it doesn't really mean anything to be bad. It's just a like, it's just doesn't, but you could actually be like, that's a huge deal if you were bad, for an instance. If you always thought you had to be good, doesn't mean anything. It's about as bad as that you're, yeah, I'm bad. It's about as bad as that. And here, let me share something else. It's just that maybe you should invest in emergency food or something, because this time the world might actually go to shit. You should. That's probably the best advice I could give to you. Like, all jokes aside, or whatever, all anything aside about what I'm doing, maybe you should just invest in emergency food, because. But it's like we're always saying people telling you to make sure that you have supplies on hand. We always treat these people like they're retarded. Interestingly enough, I think that that's funny. Or it's like, oh yeah, do you have a bunker somewhere? Like, people who are preparing, what if it actually does happen? So it kind of gets this stigma that it's like, if somebody's telling you to invest in emergency food, that they've gone off the deep end. Because at the point that you think that you have to do that, then you're just totally oblivious to reality. But like, I mean, there are scenarios that can play out, I think, where the world could go to shit, and we might be about to be living through one. Like, the world might just be screwed, and the globalists, whatever, might do their thing. But I mean, overall, we just got to get out there and tell these leaders that we don't give a fuck about authority. I mean, if we all, and it is an authority problem, and it is like we have to listen to facts and education and shit like that, and it is like that, where people get to tell you that you're ignorant for anything at all. People tell you that you're ignorant if you didn't cite your sources. Like, when somebody paints a picture, what do you say about that person? That they're ignorant? Oh, you're ignorant. What do you say? They're ignorant for painting that picture? You didn't cite your sources. It is an authority thing where we're like, well, you always have to listen to this. And if we're able to get around that, then we're not going to fall right into the hands of all these people that are like, well, you all have to do exactly as we say, and we will roll out the authoritarian state worldwide. We will create a one world and we will get rid of nations and divide it into regions of our liking. And they will do that as long as we believe that power is the most important thing to believe in. Because as we do that, and then it creates a power state where it's just levels and levels of power, and people deservedly have that power to do what they want. I mean, that's the world we create by saying power is the most important thing to listen to. But it's just kind of it's kind of like a perception, but almost goes hand in hand with perception. It's like you would have to overcome perception itself to overcome authority. Like, the reason we live in an authoritarian state is because we don't understand time. Partially. Like, us not understanding time is like, as long as we live in a world we don't get time, is, well, we have to go by the authorities, we have to go by the perceptions that we're living under, we have to go by, as far as we know, about the age that we're living in as defined to the age. And so it's like Bill Gates carving out a place in time, and this is what people do when they open businesses or make money at all, is kind of like carving out a section of time. But authoritarianism refers to sort of ordering of time, like you looking at the power structure of different authorities. This is like how time is, different authorities and how they are structured in a given moment. Kind of speaks to, or it extrapolates things about time, as opposed to an ordering that's just like a ranking system, like Fortune 500 companies, net worth of companies, and how they're ranked. That is more, oh, I don't know. You'd say that's, I'm saying like an ordering of authorities more speaks to an ordering of time, but an ordering of something else speaks more to space. Of maybe quantity. as opposed to quality. Because that we believe in an authority has to do with the quality of the authority. It's to do with the quality, the cumulative effect, the utility of that authority, like the utility that Bill Gates has as a result of aligning himself with these authorities speaks to that we view that authority to be the purest because of the quality of it, but like we typically view quality of something to be better when it has more utility. It can do more things. It's more rare if it's able to do more things, I think. Maybe. But thank you for taking part in this episode. I will put out more later on. Thank you. Bye. Bye now. Oh, and listen, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel too. I'm not opposed to that. You could just go on there and subscribe even if you don't watch the videos. That's cool. But if you don't want to, then I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say to you. Then you're dead to me. If you don't want to, then you're dead to me. But thanks for listening to that. Talk to you all later. Goodbye. Save project as good and evil.